So we have the front end set up to display information about an individual movie making a GraphQL request. And now it's time to make changes to the back end. And the changes I want to make here are to allow for a movie poster to be added to our actual list of movies. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my database, and I'll open up Postico, wherever that is. There it is. And I'm looking at my Go Movies database, and I'll open the Movies table and look at the structure. And I'll add a column, and I'm just going to call it poster, and it will be a character varying. And if you're using dbeaver, it might call it varchar, but we want to put text in there. And I'm not going to set a default, okay? And I will save that. So now I have that column, and if I look at the content for the movie, I should have null for every one of the movies that are there, and I do, so that's good. So let's go to our backend code and open models.go right there. And find movie. And I'll just add movie right here. I'll add poster right here. So poster. And it will be a string. And in JSON, I will call that poster. I'll format everything. And I'm actually going to set created at and updated at back to created at and updated at. The reason being, if I don't, these will never be exported from my GraphQL fields, from my schema. Okay, so we've added that. Now, because we have this new field available to us, we have to go to our database right here and update our GET request. So I'll just add poster, but I'm going to do it like this. Coalesce. Poster if it exists and is not null, otherwise an empty string. That'll save me the problem of having to deal with nulls from the database, which is always a pain when you're dealing with Go. That's one of the things I do not like about this language. But anyway, I've got this request in my query, so I'll add it here and populate movie.poster. And we're also going to need to make changes to the insert and update. So let's find where we're inserting a movie. There's all. And genres all, and insert movie there. So I'll put a $10 here for my 10th placeholder, and I'll insert movie.poster. And for updating a movie right here, 9 becomes a 10, and I'll put poster equal $9, and then between these last two items, movie.poster. Okay, so there's our queries. Now we need to go to GraphQL and tell GraphQL about this particular field. So down in our description of the fields, I can just add it right here. So I'm going to have one called poster, and it is a GraphQL field. And its type is GraphQL.string. And I need a comma there. So that's been added. Now the last thing we have to worry about here is to go to our movie handlers, and we need some means of getting information about the movie poster. So I'll add a function right at the very bottom of this file, and we're not going to use search movies anymore because we're doing that through GraphQL, so I can delete that stub. And I'll add a function, and I'll call it getPoster. And it doesn't need a receiver, because we're not going to call the database here. It will take one argument, movie, of type models.movie, and it will return models.movie. So basically, we'll pass our movie variable to this function, try to get a poster. If we get it, we'll add that to the variable and return it back. Otherwise, we'll just return back the variable unchanged. So this is pretty straightforward. So the first thing we're going to want to do here is to describe a new type. And I'll call the type the movie DB, because that's where we're getting the information. And it's a struct. So how am I going to do this? And I'll also write at the end, just so we can get rid of this error, say return movie. I need to describe the JSON that I'm getting back from the API that I'll be calling momentarily. So let me go back to my web browser, and I'll make a little shortcut here. So back in my web browser, if you recall, this is the URL that I'm calling. And I'll post a link to this so you can actually get it from my the course resources for this lecture. And this feeds back JSON. So I'm just going to copy this JSON, and then I'll go to this rather helpful resource that's also available for free online, and there'll be a link to it as well. What it does is it takes JSON, which I'll paste in the left side of the screen, and automatically gives me the correct struct that I can just copy and go back to my code. This is a really useful little thing. Back to my code, which is right here, and I'll just replace this type I defined here with the one I just pulled, and I'll call it again the movie DB. So that describes the JSON that I'll be getting back. Now it's just a matter of making the call to the remote API, which takes a little bit of code but isn't difficult. So we'll create a variable called client, and that will be assigned the type of a reference to http.client. Right there. And now I need to put in my key, my API key, so I'll make that a string, and I'll go back to my web browser and find my API settings. And again, you get there by going to click up here once you're logged in, choosing settings. So I click on this, choose settings, that takes me to this screen. I click on API, and you want the API key version 3. So I'll copy this, and I'll paste it in here. And I'm actually not going to put a copy of this on the course resources because I want to encourage you to go get your own API. The reason being, if everyone uses mine, it might exceed the rate limiting that's built into the API, and it might not work for you. So if you want to use this, just type it out, pause the video, type out the API, but it would probably be faster, simpler, and safer for you to go create your own account on that website. So now I have a client, I have a key. Now we need to build the URL. So I'll call it the URL. And don't call it URL because that's a built-in package. So I'm calling mine the URL. And that will be equal to HTTPS. And I got this link right from the API documentation. api.themoviedb.org/3, because we're using version 3 of the API. Search movie API_key equals. Just like that. And then I'm just to make sure everything works properly, I'm going to say log.println just to print this out. I'll print it out like this. The URL plus key plus ampersand query equals, and then I need to encode the name of the movie, the title that will be passed as part of the movie variable to this function. I need to encode it for URLs, which is really easy in Go. You use the URL package, and you're looking for query escape. I got to put a plus in there, otherwise I'm not going to get my autocomplete. Query escape, there. And inside of that, it's movie.title. And the second argument is nil. Nope, I'm just printing that out, so there is no second argument. Now that is just to print the URL out to the console, so if there's a problem, I can copy it, paste it, and see what the error is. Now we make our request. Request and error are assigned the value of http.newRequest, and we're going to pass it the type get, because it's a GET request for this API, and then I just put in the URL, the URL, plus key, plus, in quotes, ampersand, query equals, plus URL dot query escape, and it is movie.title. And now I pass the second argument of nil. So I have that. Let's check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, something went wrong, so I'll just say log.println and print the error. And now I'll just return the movie. So this won't fail, it'll just return back the movie with no poster. Now we'll add a couple of headers, rec.header.add, and we'll tell the remote API we're accepting application/JSON. And we'll add another header, content type, application JSON again. That's just good practice. Then we'll check for a response. Response and error are assigned the value of client.doRequest. And again, we check for an error. So I'll just copy this and paste it here. And if there's no error, You, of course, don't want a resource leak, so you defer resp.body.close. And then we get the bytes from the body. Body bytes, I'll call it. And error are assigned the value of io.readAll. And I'm using the IO package. Let it import it for me. .readAll. And I'm reading the response.body. And again, check for an error. So I'll paste what it's already on my clipboard. Now we'll create a variable, which I'll call var response object. And it's of type the movie, db. And I'll unmarshal my JSON. JSON.unmarshal. And we're unmarshaling body bytes into our response object. And now we check to see, is there actually a valid response in there? Now, if you look back up at the type, which was helpfully created for us by that website, you're actually going to have an array called results. And inside of that, you will find poster path. So all we have to do down here, once we unmarshal it, is to say, if the length of response object dot results is greater than 0, then we have a movie. We have a poster. So we'll just say movie.poster equals response object dot results. The first index, we'll just take the first poster we get, dot poster path. And now at the very end we return movie. So I can just delete that, format everything, and that all looks pretty good. So this is pretty simple. It's one we can call from wherever we need to. So now let's go back up and find our edit movie function, which is right here. And we can just put a simple check in. If we already have a poster, we don't want to go get it again. So we'll say if movie.poster is equal to nothing, which is what we'll get from our query if we call the database, and it will be nothing by default, an empty string by default, or if we're creating a new one, then we say movie equals get poster and hand it movie. And that should be all that we need to do. So let's try compiling this. So I'll stop my application, start my application. Everything compiled. The next step is to go and update our front end to request the poster using GraphQL and show it if it exists. And that should be pretty simple. And we'll take care of that in the next lecture.